This video will be the first part of the evaluation for the personal exercise program. Before we start getting into writing your evaluation, we're just going to be creating some graphs that we can use as part of our evaluations. This lesson is just going to be going through what type of graphs you can use to show improvements to fitness and performance that you can then write your evaluations into the next lesson. So the things we just need to look at before we can get started today is we just need to review the data that we've been collecting throughout our training program. So the things we need to have for definite is a fitness test battery of results. That fitness test data needs to be both the pre and post PEP data, so we need to have conducted a series of fitness tests before our training program and then do the same tests again after the training program, and we need to have data for those two. We need to have performance analysis data. Again, this needs to be pre and post PEP, ideally the same conditions, the same statistics that we've been trying to collect, so we can analyse the data between the two. And then during your training program, hopefully we've collected some heart rate data during our fitness training sessions that we can use to create some graphs for how our sessions went. What we now need to do is we've got this information. This lesson is just going to be looking at what can we do with that information. So obviously we're going to be writing an evaluation about it, but we need to show this in our report. And again, using graphs and charts can help us do this in a nice, easy way. So what we're just going to look at is how we can interpret the data that we've collected during our training program. For us to be able to do that, we just need to make sure we've collated that data and we've got all of that in a table that we can use. And then from those data tables, we're just going to create a graph that can represent that data, so it's nice and clear that the readers can see exactly the data that we've collected, and then we can use those graphs to write our evaluations in future lessons. So data we can use, the first ones, or the three that we're sort of going to look at today, will be fitness test data, performance analysis data, and heart rate data. There's examples on the slide now. I'm going to go through each in a little bit more detail, so just to show how you can use those three things. So the first one being fitness test data. So the table, which I would need to have created something similar to this, has a column to show the different tests that I've conducted. I've also outlined what components of fitness each of those tests are measuring. I've then got pre and post results with the comparison to normative data. So again, this normative data column will be useful for my written evaluation, but I really need to have that information clearly displayed on a table so I can see how I've scored in both of those series of tests. Now obviously from the table, if I don't include a graph, I then just have to write my evaluation around that. But if I include a graph as well, it can visually represent this data, so it'll be a little bit easier for the reader to understand how my fitness has improved. I'm going to input that data into Google Sheets or Excel or something that I can use to create the graph for me. And I'm going to put all of that data into a table that looks like this. All I've done is I've simplified that table above to just have the relevant information that I need. Two things that I've done here is I've taken away the unit of measurement where possible. So for example, the Cooper run, my score was 2,650 metres. I've just taken away the metre thing, otherwise it's not going to be able to create that into a graph. It needs to be just numbers. A hint that I've included here is to convert the Cooper run score from metres to kilometres, just so that these numbers are all relatively similar. If you've got all of these numbers between 1 and 50, and then you've got your Cooper run score as in the thousands, the bar chart won't be very easy to see because it's going to be very, very tall. So I've changed my Cooper run score from metres to kilometres just to make that graph a little bit easier. So if what I've inputted into Excel or Google Sheets looks just like this, where I've got a column with my tests, and then separate columns for post-PEP, pre-PEP and normative data, I can then highlight all of that and insert a graph that looks a little bit like this. What I can then do is, in my evaluation, I can put this graph into my evaluation and write my analysis of my fitness test changes by having something visual for the reader to refer to. Straight away, it's much easier for me to see improvements in my vertical jump, sit-up test, Cooper run, because those bars for the post-PEP are taller than the pre-PEP. I can also see ones where the post-PEP bar is above the normative data one. What's also important to just point out at this point, that for some of the tests and part of your evaluation, you would need to refer to that actually the lower the score is, the better. So for the Illinois sprint and the 30-metre sprint, the scores have actually gone down, but actually that's still showing improvement. That just means I've been able to complete those tests faster than I did the first time. The next one would be performance analysis data. So again, I've got a table at the top there that shows what data I've been collecting in my performance analysis. And then I've got the comparison between my pre and post PEP results. So this would be the statistics that I've collected before I did my training program. And these are the statistics I collected afterwards. Again, I need to input a table like that into something that I can use. So I've used Google Sheets for this one. What I've made sure this time is that all the cells have single pieces of data. So where the difference between the table at the top, where it says passes completed, 24 out of 27, and in brackets that's 88%. I can't have multiple pieces of data in one of the cells, so I've had to separate them and add a few extras in. So I've just done passes completed, and I've just done 24. Total passes 27, so I've just made that into separate columns or separate rows, otherwise the software is not going to be able to work there. So I've just made sure I've got single pieces of information in each cell. Once I've inputted all of that data, what I would do then is I would highlight all of the cells that are in the box there, and it would allow me to produce a graph that looks like this. What I would then do again is to put that into my evaluation, and as a reader straight away I can see that the post-PEP, the bars have increased for passes completed, total passes, assists. I've had shots on target that I didn't have before. It allows me to then base my analysis of my performance with some visual representation of the data that I collected. Then the final one being my heart rate data. So these are this is the information that I've collected throughout my training sessions. An example of 1 week's heart rate data I've collected. So the measurements I was taking was my resting heart rate before I started any of my training. Again, ideally these numbers would need to be between 60 and 80 beats per minute. I've then taken another heart rate reading after I've completed a warm-up, which I would expect to have had a slight increase from my resting heart rate, which you can see there. I've then taken 3 working heart rates, and the working heart rate's important that for my training intensity, I'm working between 60 and 80% of my max. So for a student in year 10, year 11 would be somewhere between 120 and 160 beats per minute. So as long as my working heart rate is around this sort of 150 bar, that shows that I'm working at a reasonable intensity during my training session. Again, depending on the type of session that you're doing would depend on what that would look like. If it was interval training or circuit training where I'm having periods of rest, maybe that heart rate would spike up and down. If it was continuous training, maybe it would be a little bit more of a flat line. And then I've taken some sort of recovery heart rate where I'm measuring my heart rate 1 minute, 3 minutes and 5 minutes after the training to show how that heart rate is gradually returning to rest. So hopefully in your training log you've got some heart rate data like this. You can collate that into a training program where you input all of your heart rate data like I've done on here. So what I've done is I've just added the same information but for week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Highlight all of the cells that are in that table and then inserted it, but this time I've selected a line graph and it will just do this graph exactly like this for me, where it will just show each week's data in different colours so I can refer to them in that evaluation. And again, that's a really easy way for me to show all of the heart rate data that I've collected in one simple graph. So using those 3 slides with those 3 different pieces of information, then you can choose which graphs you use in your PEP, remembering the more detailed your evaluation and your analysis, the higher marks you're likely to be able to access. If you're using Google Sheets or Excel, they're very similar. You just need to make sure you input the data into the spreadsheet like I'd shown on the previous slides. Remember to highlight all the cells that you want to include. Select Insert from the toolbar and select Chart. There'll be a range of graphs that you can choose from. Remember, you just want to choose the one that's going to showcase your data in the simplest way.